She thought the billionaire CEO was mocking her until he did this in front of everyone. The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floors of the Grand Riverside Hotel ballroom. Mary Anthony stood near the refreshment table, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed down her only formal dress, a modest navy blue piece she'd found at a thrift store 3 years ago. The fabric was clean, carefully pressed that morning, but it couldn't hide its age or the fact that it hung a little too loose on her frame now. 30 years old, a single mother, and somehow she'd ended up at the city's most prestigious charity gala. Mary still wasn't sure how she'd gotten the invitation. It had arrived in her mailbox 2 weeks ago, addressed to her specifically, inviting her to the Evening of Hope charity benefit. She'd almost thrown it away, assuming it was a mistake, but her daughter Cynthia had found it first. "Mama, you should go," the 8-year-old had said, her eyes wide with excitement. "It says it's for people who help the community. You help people all the time." Mary had laughed at that. She volunteered at the community center when she could, between her 2 jobs waiting tables at the diner and cleaning offices at night. Helping was a generous word for what she did. Surviving was more accurate. But Cynthia had been so insistent, so hopeful, that Mary had finally agreed. Her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had offered to watch Cynthia for the evening. And now here, Mary stood, feeling completely out of place among women in designer gowns and men in tailored tuxedos that probably cost more than her annual rent. She picked up a glass of sparkling water, not trusting herself with the champagne that circulated on silver trays. The last thing she needed was to embarrass herself further by getting tipsy. Around her, conversations flowed about stock portfolios, European vacations, and business acquisitions. Mary tried to make herself invisible, which wasn't hard. No one had spoken to her all evening. That's when she noticed him. Adrian Keane. She recognized him immediately, even though she'd only seen him in newspapers and on the local news. At 38, he was one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the state, CEO of Keane Industries, a conglomerate that owned everything from tech startups to real estate developments. He was tall, with dark hair graying slightly at the temples, wearing a tuxedo that fit him like it had been created specifically for his frame, which it probably had. He was speaking with a group of older men near the stage, his expression serious, but his eyes sharp, alert. Mary found herself watching him, wondering what it must be like to move through the world with that kind of confidence, that kind of power. And then, impossibly, his eyes found hers. Mary's breath caught. For a moment, she thought she'd imagined it. But no, Adrian Keane was looking directly at her, his gaze steady and unnervingly intense. She quickly looked away, her cheeks burning. She shouldn't have stared. That was probably some rule she'd broken, some unspoken etiquette of these events. She decided to leave. This had been a mistake. She'd make her excuses to no one in particular and slip out, go back to her small apartment where Cynthia was probably already asleep, curled up with the worn teddy bear that had been Mary's when she was a child. But as she turned toward the exit, she nearly collided with someone. "Excuse me," she mumbled, stepping back. "No need to apologize." Mary looked up, and her heart stopped. Adrian Keane stood directly in front of her, his expression unreadable. She started, then faltered. What was she supposed to say? He tilted his head slightly, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to shrink into herself. Then, in a voice loud enough that several people nearby turned to look, he said, "Hey, you look like you've been working all your life without pay. Who did this to you?" The words hit Mary like a physical blow. Around them, conversations died. People turned to stare. A few gasped. The humiliation was instant and complete. Her face burned so hot she thought she might actually catch fire. She could see it in their faces, the pity, the judgment, the schadenfreude. The poor woman in the cheap dress being put in her place by Adrian Keane himself. Of course this would happen. Of course. Mary's voice cracked. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come here. This was a mistake. She turned to leave, tears already blurring her vision. She'd made it perhaps 3 steps when Adrian's voice rang out again. This time, even louder. Everyone, please, I need your attention. The entire ballroom fell silent. Mary froze, unable to move forward or back, trapped in the worst moment of her life. I apologize, Adrian continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. That came out all wrong, and I've clearly upset this woman. But please, let me explain. Because I need everyone here to understand what I'm seeing right now. Mary turned slowly, confused. Adrian was still standing where she'd left him, but his expression had changed. There was something in his eyes now, something that looked almost like remorse? 6 months ago, Adrian said, addressing the crowd but keeping his eyes on Mary. I sat in on job interviews at one of my smaller companies, Keane Solutions. It was something I rarely do anymore, but I wanted to see who we were hiring, what kind of people were representing our brand. Mary felt a chill run through her. Keane Solutions, she remembered. She'd applied for a data entry position, nothing glamorous, but it would have had benefits, steady hours. She'd made it to the final interview round. One of the candidates that day was a woman named. Adrian paused, pulling out his phone and scrolling briefly. Mary Anthony. She arrived for her interview early. I remember because I was in the waiting area myself, reviewing files. She had a young child with her, a daughter, I believe. Mary's breath caught. She'd had no choice but to bring Cynthia that day. Her usual childcare had fallen through, and she couldn't afford to miss the interview. I watched her, Adrian continued, his voice softer now, but still carrying across the silent room. The way she entertained her daughter quietly, keeping her occupied with a worn coloring book and broken crayons while reading over her resume one more time. The way she straightened her clothes before being called in, putting on that brave face we all wear when we need something desperately but can't show it. Around the room, people were leaning in, listening intently. Mary stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. She didn't get the job, Adrian said, and there was something in his voice now, regret, anger at himself. I looked into it later. The hiring manager passed her over for someone with more experience, which is standard practice, good business sense. But I remember thinking at the time, that woman has something special. The way she handled herself, the obvious love for her child, the determination in her eyes even though she looked exhausted. He turned fully to face Mary now, taking a step closer. When I saw you walk in tonight, Miss Anthony, I recognized you immediately. And I was shocked, because in 6 months, you look like. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Like life has been even harder on you. Like you've been working multiple jobs, probably, just to make ends meet. Probably still without any real benefits or support. And I realized that my company, one of MY companies, had been part of that. We passed you over. We said no. And I could see what that no had cost you. Mary felt tears streaming down her face now, but she couldn't move to wipe them away. So, when I said what I said, Adrian continued, his voice thick with emotion, I wasn't mocking you. I was asking, genuinely asking, who did this to you? Who let you slip through the cracks? Who looked at a woman with your obvious strength and determination and said, not good enough? He paused, then added quietly, and the answer is, I did. My company did, and I need to make that right. The ballroom was so quiet, Mary could hear her own heartbeat, pounding in her ears. Adrian pulled out his phone again. Miss Anthony, I know this is unconventional, but I'd like to offer you a position. Not at Keane Solutions they had their chance. At Keane Industries headquarters, executive assistant level, full benefits, salary starting at. He named a figure that made Mary's knees weak. With performance bonuses, the position comes with company housing if needed. I can't, Mary interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. My daughter, I can't afford proper child care on my current. Then we solve that problem, Adrian said simply. My estate has more than enough room. You and your daughter can live there while you get on your feet. And if you're concerned about your daughter's education, I can arrange for the best tutors, eventually cover her university education when the time comes. Before you go any further with this story, I want to ask you something. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, please hit that subscribe button. This channel brings you real stories of hope, redemption, and unexpected kindness every single week. Don't miss out. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that might just change your perspective on life. The crowd erupted, not in mockery or judgment, but in applause. People were nodding, some women dabbing at their eyes. Mary stood there, completely overwhelmed, unable to process what had just happened. Adrian approached her slowly, as if afraid she might bolt. I know this sounds insane, he said quietly, just for her. You don't know me. You have no reason to trust me. But I'm serious about this offer. You deserve a chance, Miss Anthony. You deserved it 6 months ago, and you certainly deserve it now. Mary opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Why? She finally managed. Why would you do this? Adrian smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Because sometimes we get a chance to fix our mistakes, and when we do, we should take it. He extended his hand. What do you say? Mary looked at his hand, then at his face, then around at the sea of people watching them. She thought of Cynthia, asleep in Mrs. Patterson's apartment. She thought of the bills piled on her kitchen counter. She thought of the double shifts and the aching feet and the constant worry that one bad break would send their fragile life tumbling down. And she thought, what if? She reached out and shook his hand. The next 3 months passed in a blur that Mary still struggled to believe was real. Adrian had meant everything he said. Within a week, Mary and Cynthia had moved into the east wing of his sprawling estate. A section of the house that was essentially a luxury apartment, complete with its own kitchen, living room, and 2 bedrooms that were each bigger than their entire previous apartment. Cynthia had cried when she first saw her new bedroom. Is this really ours, Mama? She'd whispered, touching the plush carpet, the new furniture, the walls painted the exact shade of purple she'd always wanted. Yes, baby, Mary had whispered back, her own tears flowing freely. This is really ours. The job was equally surreal. Adrian's personal assistant, a woman named Patricia who was efficient but kind, trained Mary in her new role. Executive assistant to the CEO meant managing Adrian's schedule, screening calls and emails, preparing briefing documents for meetings, and generally making sure his professional life ran smoothly. It was challenging work, far more demanding than anything Mary had done before. But Patricia was patient, and Mary discovered she had a natural aptitude for organization and anticipating needs. Within a month, Adrian was commenting on how much smoother his days ran with her help. But it was the small, unexpected moments that began to change everything. Like the morning Mary found Adrian in the kitchen at 6 a.m. making coffee, and he'd insisted on making her a cup too while they discussed his schedule for the day. The way he asked about Cynthia's adjustment to her new school, a private academy that Adrian had enrolled her in with full scholarship. The afternoon she'd found him on the floor of Cynthia's bedroom, helping her build an elaborate Lego castle. "Mr. Keane, you don't have to," Mary had started. "Adrian," he'd corrected, not looking up from the instruction manual. "And Cynthia asked for help. I'm not doing anything I don't want to do." Her daughter had looked up at him with such open adoration that Mary's heart had clenched. It became a pattern. Adrian would finish his workday, and instead of retreating to his own section of the house, would often find his way to where Mary and Cynthia were. Sometimes he'd help with homework. Sometimes they'd all watch a movie together. Sometimes he'd challenge Cynthia to chess matches that he claimed were excellent training for strategic thinking, even as he let her win just often enough to keep her confidence up. Mary tried to maintain professional boundaries. She really did. Adrian was her employer. This arrangement, generous as it was still a business transaction. She couldn't forget that. But it became harder and harder as she watched Adrian transform around her daughter. This man who commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals would sit on the floor and listen with complete attention as Cynthia explained the complex social dynamics of third-grade friendships. He learned the names of all her stuffed animals. He showed up to her school play, sitting in the audience and applauding louder than anyone else. And the way he looked at Mary when he thought she wasn't watching. "You know he's falling for you, right?" Patricia said one afternoon when Mary was organizing files in the office. Mary's hands froze. "What? No. He's being kind. He feels responsible for us." Patricia laughed. "Honey, I've worked for Adrian Keane for 8 years. I've seen him interact with hundreds of people. The way he looks at you, that's not responsibility. That's something else entirely." Mary shook her head firmly. "It doesn't matter. Even if that were true, which it isn't, I work for him. This whole situation is already unusual enough. We can't. But the words felt hollow even as she said them, because the truth was, Mary was falling too. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, 3 months after Mary and Cynthia had moved in. Mary was in the estate's library, a 2-story room filled with more books than she'd ever seen, outside of a public library curled up in a window seat, with a novel she'd been meaning to read for years but never had time for. "There you are." She looked up to find Adrian standing in the doorway. He was dressed casually, jeans and a sweater, and his hair was slightly mussed, like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked nervous, which was strange. Adrian never looked nervous. "Is everything okay?" Mary asked, setting down her book. "Do you need something for Monday's meeting?" "No. He ran a hand through his hair again, confirming her theory. "Actually, I need to talk to you. Can I sit?" "Of course." He sat in the chair across from her window seat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. For a long moment, he just looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I'm going to say something," he finally began, "and I need you to know that your position here, your security, Cynthia's education, none of that is contingent on your response. If you say no to what I'm about to ask, nothing changes. You still have your job, your home, everything I promised. Do you understand?" Mary's heart began to pound. "Adrian, you're scaring me!" "I don't mean to." He took a deep breath. "Mary, these past 3 months have been. I don't even have words for it. Having you and Cynthia here, it's changed everything. This house used to feel like a museum I lived in. Now it feels like a home." "Adrian, please, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm 38 years old. I've built an empire, achieved every professional goal I set for myself, but I've never had a family. I told myself I didn't need one. that I was fine alone. And then you came into my life. You and Cynthia." He leaned back, his eyes never leaving hers. "I love the way Cynthia runs to me when I come home from work. I love teaching her chess and hearing about her day. I love finding her hair clips on my desk and her drawings on my refrigerator. And I love—" He paused, his voice dropping. "I love you, Mary. I'm in love with you. Completely. Impossibly. In love with you." Mary couldn't breathe. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "I know this is sudden," Adrian continued quickly. "I know you might not feel the same way, and that's okay. But I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. I wake up thinking about you. I go to sleep thinking about you. When something good happens, you're the first person I want to tell. When something goes wrong, you're the person I need beside me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Mary's hands flew to her mouth. "I'm not asking you to answer right now," Adrian said, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring, simple but elegant. "I'm just asking you to think about it. Mary Anthony, will you marry me? Will you let me be part of your family? Let me be Cynthia's father, officially. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you taking a chance on me at that gala was the best decision either of us ever made?" Tears streamed down Mary's face. "Adrian, You don't have to answer now," he repeated. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait." But Mary was shaking her head. "I can't. I need to think. I need." She stood abruptly. "I'm sorry. I need some air." She left him there, in the library, and fled to her room. The next month was torture. Mary couldn't think clearly when she was around Adrian. So she'd made a decision that hurt her heart but felt necessary. She and Cynthia moved out of the estate and back into their old apartment building. Not their old apartment that had been rented to someone else, but a unit 2 floors up that Mary could now afford with her new salary. Adrian had looked devastated when she told him, but he'd helped them move without argument. He'd respected her need for space, even though she could see how much it cost him. "Mama, why did we have to leave?" Cynthia asked for the 100th time, her voice thick with tears. "I miss Adrian. I miss my purple room." "I know, baby," Mary whispered, holding her daughter close. "I miss him too." And God, did she miss him? The apartment felt empty in a way it never had before. Too quiet, too small, too devoid of Adrian's presence. His laugh, his gentle teasing, the way he hummed off-key when he cooked breakfast on weekends. Patricia called her regularly. "He's miserable," she reported. "Barely sleeping. He's thrown himself into work like a madman. Mary, whatever you're working through, please work through it quickly, for both your sakes." But Mary was terrified. Terrified of making a mistake. Terrified of believing in something too good to be true. Terrified of letting Cynthia and herself depend on someone who might leave or change or realize this was all a mistake. She'd been hurt before. Cynthia's father had promised forever and then disappeared when Mary got pregnant, leaving her with nothing but broken promises and a mountain of hospital debt. How could she trust this? How could she believe that Adrian, brilliant, successful, wealthy Adrian, truly wanted her? Truly wanted them? But then she thought about the way he looked at Cynthia, the way he'd learned to braid hair so he could help her daughter get ready for school, the way he'd framed one of Cynthia's drawings and hung it in his office at work, the way he looked at Mary, like she was the most precious thing in his world. And she thought about how she felt when she was with him. Safe, seen, valued, loved. 4 weeks after she'd moved out, Mary made her decision. It was early evening when Mary drove back to the estate, Cynthia bouncing excitedly in the back seat. Are we going back, Mama? Are we really going back? We'll see, baby, Mary said. But she was smiling. The gates opened automatically. Adrian had never revoked their access, and she drove up the long driveway to the front entrance. Her hands were shaking as she rang the doorbell. Patricia answered, her eyes widening. Mary? Does he know you're— No, Mary admitted. Is he home? In his study. Go. I'll keep Cynthia entertained. Can I go find Adrian? Cynthia asked hopefully. In a few minutes, sweetheart, Patricia said, winking at Mary. Let your mom talk to him first. Mary climbed the familiar stairs to Adrian's study, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She knocked softly. Come in, came his voice, tired and distracted. She opened the door. Adrian was at his desk, surrounded by papers, his laptop open. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and his hair unkempt. But when he looked up and saw her, his entire face transformed. Mary. He stood so quickly his chair rolled backward. Is everything okay? Is Cynthia— We're fine, Mary said quickly. I needed to see you. He came around the desk, but stopped a few feet away, as if afraid to get too close. I've missed you, he said simply. Both of you. The house is so empty without you. Adrian, Mary took a deep breath. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I ran. I'm sorry I needed space, but I had to be sure. Sure of what? He asked gently. Sure that this was real. Sure that you really meant what you said. Sure that I wasn't going to wake up one day and find out this was all some beautiful dream. She laughed shakily. I've spent so long barely surviving that I forgot how to hope. Forgot how to believe in good things happening to me. And then you came along and offered me everything I'd ever dreamed of, and it terrified me. Adrian took a step closer. And now? Now. Mary reached into her purse with trembling hands and pulled out a small box. Now I'm sure. I'm sure that you're the most amazing man I've ever met. I'm sure that Cynthia lights up in a way I've never seen when you're around. I'm sure that I love you so much it scares me sometimes. And I'm sure, she opened the box, revealing a simple gold band, that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Adrian's eyes widened. Mary. You asked me to marry you? She said, her voice shaking but determined. And I'm saying yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll let you be part of our family, Adrian, because you already are. Yes to all of it. To forever. To everything. For a moment, Adrian just stared at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. Then he crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms and kissing her like she was the air he needed to breathe. Yes? He mumbled against her lips. Really, yes? Really? Yes, Mary laughed, crying and kissing him back. I love you. I love you so much. I love you too, he breathed. God, Mary, I love you so much. You and Cynthia, you're everything. Everything. They stood there, holding each other, until a small voice from the doorway made them break apart. Does this mean we're going home? Cynthia asked hopefully, Patricia standing behind her with a knowing smile. Adrian and Mary looked at each other, then at Cynthia, then back at each other. Yes, Adrian said, kneeling down to Cynthia's level. This means you're coming home. If that's okay with you? Cynthia launched herself at him, wrapping her small arms around his neck. I missed you so much, Adrian. I missed you too, princess, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked up at Mary over Cynthia's head, his eyes full of love and promise and joy. Mary knelt down too, wrapping her arms around both of them, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, She felt completely, perfectly, impossibly home. 6 months later, Mary stood in the estate's garden, surrounded by flowers in full bloom, wearing a simple but elegant wedding dress. Cynthia stood beside her as maid of honor, practically vibrating with excitement in her pale pink dress. The ceremony was small, just close friends and family, plus Patricia, who had become like family herself. But among the guests was one face that made Mary smile every time she looked over. Mrs. Patterson from her old apartment building, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. As Mary walked down the aisle toward Adrian, who looked at her like she'd hung the moon, she thought about that night at the gala. How she'd almost left. How she'd been so sure she didn't belong there. How she'd thought the worst when Adrian had spoken those words that had changed everything. Now, as she reached him and took his hands, she understood something profound. Sometimes the moments that feel like endings are actually beginnings. Sometimes the words that sound like mockery are actually the start of a love story. Sometimes the people who seem out of reach are exactly the ones who will reach back. "I love you," Adrian whispered as the officiant began to speak. "I love you too," Mary whispered back. And when they kissed, sealing their promises to each other, Cynthia cheered louder than anyone else, making everyone laugh through their tears. 5 years later, Mary sat on the porch of their estate, their home, watching, as Adrian taught their now 13-year-old Cynthia how to change a tire on her first car, a modest sedan he'd insisted on getting her for her birthday, despite wanting to buy her something far fancier. "Dad, I got it!" Cynthia called out, triumphant. "I did it myself!" "That's my girl," Adrian said proudly. One more skill checked off the list. Mary smiled, her hand resting on her rounded belly. 7 months pregnant with twins, she was on modified bed rest, which mostly meant Adrian and Cynthia fussed over her constantly. She thought about the woman she'd been exhausted, desperate, barely surviving. She thought about that night at the gala, standing alone in a borrowed dress, feeling like she didn't belong. She thought about Adrian's words that had seemed so cruel but had actually been the most honest, most compassionate thing anyone had ever said to her. "Hey, you look like you've been working all your life without pay. Who did this to you?" At the time, she'd heard only mockery. Now she understood he'd been seeing her, really seeing her, in a way no one else had. He'd been asking who had failed her, who had let her carry so much alone, who had looked at her and not seen her worth. And then he'd made it his mission to make sure no one, including herself, ever underestimated her worth again. "What are you thinking about?" Adrian asked, coming up to the porch and sitting beside her, careful not to jostle her. "Just everything," Mary said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "How much has changed. How lucky I am. How lucky we are," Adrian corrected. He placed his hand over hers on her belly, feeling one of the twins kick. "I'm the lucky one, you know. You took a chance on me. You trusted me. You let me into your life. Best decision I ever made," Mary said softly. "Before we wrap up this story, I need to hear from you. What did you think? Did this story touch your heart? Have you ever had a moment where someone saw you, really saw you when you needed it most? Leave a comment below and tell me your story. And while you're at it, let me know where you're watching from. This community spans the globe, and I love knowing where you all are. Drop your location in the comments. Second best, Adrian corrected with a smile. The best decision you ever made was coming back. When you showed up that day with that ring, you cried, Mary teased. I did not cry. I had something in my eye. Several somethings. Simultaneously, Mary laughed, the sound bright and free. From the driveway, Cynthia called out, Mom! Dad! Come see! I'm going to teach you guys how to change a tire now. She's teaching us now? Adrian said, amused. She's a teenager. She knows everything, Mary replied, laughing. They helped Mary up carefully, so carefully, and walked together toward their daughter, their family, their life. The evening sun cast everything in golden light, and somewhere in the house, Mary's phone buzzed with a message from Patricia, checking in as she always did. Mary looked at Adrian, then at Cynthia, then down at her belly where 2 more lives were growing. And she thought, this is what happens when you don't give up. When you show up, when you take the chance, even when you're terrified, when you let yourself be seen, really seen, by someone who knows how to look. That night at the gala, she'd been so sure it was the worst moment of her life. She'd been so certain Adrian's words were meant to humiliate her. But they'd been the beginning of everything good, everything beautiful, everything she'd ever wanted but never dared to dream. Sometimes the moments that break us open are the ones that let the light in. Sometimes the words that seem cruel are actually the most honest kindness. Sometimes the endings are just beginnings in disguise. And sometimes, just sometimes, the billionaire CEO who seems to be mocking you is actually seeing you more clearly than anyone ever has, seeing your worth, seeing your strength, seeing the woman you are and the woman you could be with. Just a little bit of support, a little bit of belief, a little bit of love. "Mom, you're crying again," Cynthia said, noticing. "Happy tears, baby," Mary said, wiping her eyes. "Always happy tears now." Adrian wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close, and Cynthia leaned against them both. They stood there, the 3 of them, soon to be 5, as the sun set behind them and the future stretched out ahead, bright and beautiful and full of possibility. And Mary knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. If this story moved you, if it made you believe in second chances and unexpected kindness, please take a moment to like this video. Hit that thumbs up button and let the algorithm know you want more stories like this one. Better yet, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose life might be changed by a story of hope. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, your story isn't over yet. The best chapters might still be waiting to be written. Sometimes, all it takes is someone who sees you, really sees you, and decides you're worth betting on. Until next time, keep believing in the unexpected. Keep showing up. Keep taking chances. Because you never know when the worst moment might actually be the beginning of everything beautiful.